The alarm bells are deafening, and the evidence is irrefutable. Greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuel burning and deforestation are choking our planet and putting billions of people at immediate risk. We are on a fast track to climate disaster. This is not fiction or exaggeration. It is what science tells us will result from our current energy policies. This is a climate emergency. Good evening, everyone. This is day 12 at the COP27 conference, coming to you from Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. I'm Casey Schulberg, the Collier County Waterkeeper, host for these daily programs, along with Dr. John Capice, the Kissimmee Waterkeeper. Well, in case there was any doubt that the intractable issue of loss and damage was the stalemate blocking all other agreements from getting signed at this year's COP, just listen to the Secretary General's Hail Mary plea issued in a press release earlier today. The time for talking on loss and damage finance is over. We need action. We cannot continue to deny climate justice to those who have contributed least to the climate crisis and are getting hurt the most. To give you a bit of background, Article 8 of the Paris Agreement signed in 2015 enshrines the importance of averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. As you all must know, loss and damage is a concept whereby less developed nations look to the developed nations to underwrite climate change harm. The theory being that those underdeveloped countries did not cause climate change and need to be compensated for the damage they are suffering. Alternatively, they feel they should not be denied fossil fuel energy from oil and gas and coal, the very same offending fuels that allowed developed nations to flourish and thrive for the last century. This has been characterized as a north-south standoff, as many in the southern hemisphere, in Africa, South America, and parts of Asia have economies that are much less developed than those of Europe and North America. For decades, those less developed nations have had their noses pressed to the glass, watching wealthy nations relish the benefits of a rampant fossil fuel heyday, while poor nations struggle to provide the most basic services for their citizens. This is a moral issue. It is also a massive financial one. It comes down to a rebalancing of financial resources from the developed to the underdeveloped nations. And that, my friends, is one very sticky wicket. Again, tonight, we have a jam-packed show with John's daily commentary, followed by a great interview with nationally renowned medical doctor and psychiatrist, Dr. Lise Van Sustren. Then, as today's conference theme is solutions, we travel with team member Esteban Rodofili to hear about some groundbreaking technological advances coming out of Japan. In addition, we want you to meet the newest member of our team who arrived for week 2, Jeff Dismukes. Finally, we have MIchal Fidler's photo recap of the day. Let's get right into it and hear from John.
We're approaching the end of COP27, and today was Solutions Day. And the COP27 president issued a statement today emphasizing the need for the delegates to achieve some of the goals that they had set for this COP. And this is a fairly typical event. They never achieve all their goals, and often they have to extend the stay of the delegates by a day or two. So often the conference will extend into the weekend. But in an effort to motivate the delegates to achieve their goals, the COP president issued a statement today in which he talked about, he made statements such as mitigation work program is yet to reach the desired outcome. Adaptation is still held back by procedural matters. Ambitious outcomes on finance have not yet materialized. And then he went into the loss and damage. Loss and damage parties are shying away from taking decisions. And he invited the Secretary General to join the group and for the final days of COP, and he had a discussion with him about loss and damage. And loss and damage has been a topic of this conference from the beginning, and it's clearly an important item as it approaches the end. And it's much like show us the money. The developing nations are telling the developed nations to begin providing, in effect, reparations for climate damage. And this is a touchy topic. Developed nations like the United States are shying away from making any money. But I think that the obvious solution to this is to establish a percentage of national investments in climate solutions should go to loss and damage. And that needs to be managed carefully such that nations that are simply following the same mistaken course that developed nations did as far as reliance upon fossil fuels are incentivized to divert from that strategy and using the loss and damage payments as a way of achieving that objective. But I today visited some of the smaller exhibits. I mentioned before that I thought there were 35 of these smaller booths in addition to the 147 pavilions, but in fact there are 50 of these. So given that each exhibitor has only a week, that means 100 additional exhibitors through these smaller booths. So I visited a couple of them today. One of them was managed by various U.S. universities and the student groups within them. So that was interesting and enjoyable to talk with them. And this included Michigan Tech University, Colorado State, University of Connecticut, Colorado State, Emory, and Vanderbilt, as well as the University of California system. Then I went over to the University of Berlin and spoke with a researcher there who was working on agroecology, agricultural systems combined with biodiversity. And he was focusing on the Amazonia region where Brazil, Peru, and Bolivia come together. And his work focused on documenting the benefits of the tropical forests as far as the sink for carbon dioxide, and documenting how, when it's converted to traditional agriculture, often these lands are cleared for pasture, how a lot of the carbon that is stored in the soil and the canopy is lost and very difficult to recover. So this is happening throughout Amazonia, and it's a serious issue. Also visited with some Indian representatives who have a program there sponsored by UNESCO, and it addresses education. They've developed virtual education tools on the climate issue. Then a fellow from Jordan who's working on environmental issues there. Great pleasure to talk with them. Then I went over to the U.S. Center, and they had a series of panel discussions, some of which were interesting, some of which seemed a little forced, but they began with a lead by example session where state and local government folks were discussing their various programs. And these included a Department of Interior Assistant Secretary for Water and Science, and then representative from Minnesota talked about weatherization programs, New Mexico talked about well plugging, and California spoke about electrifying the ports. So these were all government officials, mayors, cabinet officers for the state. Very interesting panel. After that, there was a panel on net zero government. National governments, a panel on net zero government. A goal to achieve by 2050, national governments having net zero emissions. Now, this was sponsored by the USA, and the objective set by the Americans was to achieve 50% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. And they were talking about one of their primary goals is light-duty vehicles, converting those over within the government fleet entirely to electric by 2027. The Netherlands talked about purchasing power and how national governments, by decarbonizing their own operations, can drive products and services within the nation through their purchasing power. Ireland talked about a carbon tax and other programs that they had going. Similarly, Germany discussed their programs, And France pointed out that they were able to achieve 10% reduction in only 2 years simply by doing the basics as far as energy conservation. And Australia said that they'd established a goal to decarbonize their government by 2030. And they were in Australia, homes already are 33% solar. A second panel with Singapore, Japan, and Canada basically went through the same process, discussing some of their electrification and vehicles. And Canada seemed to be quite a long way ahead. Japan as well. Japan basically said, USA, you're kind of late to the game. We had a plan for decarbonizing our government back in 2002, and we are well on our way. So these were some of the sessions. And then at the end, they had one session that seemed a little contrived about climate smart networks, basically business integration. So they gave several businesses an opportunity to talk about their efforts and how they were decarbonized. So on this last day, one of the last days of COP27, there were some interesting discussions to be had in the American Center, and it'll remain to be seen how much progress the delegates actually make towards their goal, particularly on the mitigation front. However, they do seem to be particularly focused on loss and damage, and we'll see how that ends up in the next day or so.
As always, John. Our next guest has so many hyphens, it's hard to encapsulate them in the time we have. She's a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, an author. She profiled world leaders for the CIA. She was appointed to the Climate Change Project by Al Gore. She's currently an expert witness for 2 environmental lawsuits. She ran for public office. She did post-traumatic counseling after Katrina in New Orleans and after the devastating earthquake in Haiti. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lise Van Sustren. So Dr. Van Sustren, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us a little bit this evening. You have done so many things from your medical doctor. You are a psychiatrist. You write books. You have been engaged by the CIA. You were appointed by Al Gore to the Climate Project. It's hard to know where to start, but let me ask you this. The Hippocratic Oath is the bedrock of the medical profession, and that is do no harm. So how do you think we're doing as a global community in the do no harm domain?
I'm sure, first of all, thanks for that introduction, which was pretty extravagant, but we're all familiar with the phrase lying by omission. And there's also the concept of harming by failing to act. And the way I look at the medical community right now, my colleagues right now, and the public to a lesser extent, and certainly our policymakers, is that we are doing harm by not taking action. We have a terrible, it's not just a threat anymore, reality chasing us down, and we are not responding with the kind of action that is consistent with the health of not only ourselves, but of course, future generations.
I mean, I know you've done climate change, post-traumatic stress disorder work in Haiti and after Hurricane Katrina. So we've seen the ravages of these storms and the onslaught of climate change causes so much human catastrophe. We in Florida just suffered back-to-back storms, and people that I've spoken to who lost everything, including sometimes their pets and their loved ones, are just in a sort of state of shock. And then we had another storm almost on top of that, and there was palpable fear. So this can really impact human livelihood and human wellness. So talk a little bit about the impacts of climate change disasters on mental health.
There are a number of places to focus on that. We can look at it from a demographic perspective, who's at the tip of the spear, who is in the bullseye, who is poor and vulnerable because of socioeconomic conditions, and who is well-educated and wealthy. So there are many ways to look at this, but the overarching points to make are that and we've heard this before, is that those who are the most vulnerable will be hurt, of course, worse than anyone else, because they can't make the protections or take the protections that other people do. So they're hurt the worst and first is the same. Then there's another group to look at, and that is, of course, children. And they will suffer a cumulative toll. And you mentioned how in Florida you had back-to-back events. Well, kids are going to be facing an onslaught of back-to-back events as storms increase in intensity and frequency. And people, not in this particular interview, but they can look up ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences, and see how they cause lifelong morbidity. In other words, increased exposure to illness and other conditions, and life and mortality, meaning that they die earlier when they are exposed to adverse childhood experiences. And of course, trauma, depression, anxiety, domestic violence, including child abuse, are in there. And so we look at this, or at least I do, from the direct exposure. And then there's the indirect exposure, which, we're not potted plants sitting here. We see people suffering, dying, as you said, losing everything, their houses, their communities, their pets, their belongings. And what does that do to us? How does it affect our attitude about government institutions, elected officials? So the concern is, you gather all that together, what's the impact on communities? Well, you do the math.
Yeah. I mean, we've been making the point all week that those in less developed countries or more disadvantaged are suffering the brunt of climate change calamity. We're seeing it in Pakistan, where 1/3 of the country was submerged 2 months ago. We're seeing it in Senegal, where they're losing hundreds of miles of coastline every day, and people have to change their livelihoods all of a sudden. We see it in Bangladesh, where the farmers have to just lay down their hoes because saltwater infiltration means that the land that they've cultivated for maybe 1,000 years is no longer cultivatable. So they move to the cities, put stress on the cities. So there's all kinds of upheaval, and it's going to cause strife. As people become more desperate, they will become more, their tensions will fray. And this is what we're worried about, is that the percentage, the probability of strife will increase because people are in a desperate situation. Does that sync up with the research you're doing, Dr.?
Well, it syncs up with common sense, to tell you the truth. And you didn't address the impacts of food shortages and the fact that all of this disruption that you are speaking of causes, you did mention civil strife, but what happens is it puts people on the move. They can't live where they're living. Mm-hmm. And so we have a surge in refugees. What happened in Syria and the refugee crisis all across Europe that upended our political systems was caused in part by drought that made it impossible to live where people were living. And then you put people in places where they can't be welcomed because people's resources are already scarce, and you have civil strife, you have tension. So we have all the attendant impacts, not only on the road to try to find safety, but the long-term impacts on our political systems. And we are seeing an erosion of democracy. And I'm just going to say this. I know this is a long-winded response about what affects communities.
Go for it.
But when communities are stressed, we regress. We get a little bit like adolescence, and the back part of our brain, not the front part of our brain, which is all about judgment and morality and being deliberate and careful, etc. It's the back part of our brain, our survival instincts. And when those kick in, what happens is that we start scapegoating other people for our troubles. And we look often to exchange, or we'll be willing to exchange, long cherished values for promises of security from people who are nothing but thugs and bullies. Yeah. So I fear the erosion of democracy.
Yeah, we saw that in Germany. People were suffering in the 30s, the end of the 20s and early 30s, and they basically abdicated their judgment and passed power along to some very dangerous dictators. And we saw
Well,
we flirted with that here.
yes, we have. I was going to add that, but since you're going to, I defer. I hand you the mic on that one.
Well, we just barely dodged a bullet. Whether that will prevail is an open question. We all have to be vigilant about holding those values and recalibrating, rebalancing, so that we don't get trapped in that knee-jerk, adulation of the shiny autocrat that might come along.
That's correct. And the blame game that somebody else is the cause, it's a scapegoat that we don't want to understand the larger issues. And so we blame the finger pointing starts, and it usually goes towards the minority.
Absolutely. Dr. Van Sustren, tell us about the lawsuits you're engaged in. I was really intrigued by that. I'd like to hear a little bit more.
Okay, well, I am the expert witness on the psychological damages to youth plaintiffs in 2 cases. I'm a forensic psychiatrist, and my work with the executive branch of government, which is how I usually phrase working for the agency, as we call it, was to profile world leaders so that we could better understand how to talk to each other. So in the Juliana case, which is the first case that I became a part of, there are 21 youth plaintiffs and Dr. James Hansen, the climate scientist, who are suing the federal government for insufficient action on climate. And specifically, you have to have a law that's being broken. And the law that's being broken is the Constitution, which says that we have a right to life, liberty, and property. And these kids are losing lives, and they are seeing lives being lost. They're certainly not free under the circumstances in which weather events, short-term or chronic, force them to make certain decisions. And there's been an extensive loss of property. So that's the Juliana case. It's against the federal government. The second case is a case against the state of Montana. It's called Held versus the state of Montana. And it is 16 youth plaintiffs suing the Montana government, again, on constitutional grounds, because the Montana state constitution specifically says that Montana residents, Montanans, have the right to a safe and healthy environment. So we're pursuing them on those legal grounds.
Well, wow, we will pay attention to that. We have a young member of our team in Egypt named Valhali Frank, who is a member of the Seminole Nation, the Seminole tribe of Florida, and has been an environmental, she's now 19, but she's been an environmental activist since she was about 12. And she entered into a petition to sue with a small group of young people to sue the state of Florida and Governor DeSantis over similar claims. Their suit was dismissed, so they weren't able to get it over the finish line. But we applaud her, and next time I'll have her call you as an expert witness. Maybe they can.
Well, it may very well be that she's working with the organization that has been doing this work, and they deserve to be called out very, very favorably. They work night and day on these issues. Our Children's Trust is a group of lawyers that has worked to put these cases together. So
we're in agreement that we're not doing enough. How do we shake people out of their complacency?
So that's the best question for us to focus on. I think all this other is certainly worth noting, but shaking people out of their complacency. Well, it used to be a lot harder, but Mother Nature is making the case now. I could shut a dinner party down in minutes by bringing up climate with friends, and did. But it doesn't shut down anymore. Well, of course, the pandemic, I haven't been to so many. But Mother Nature is now making the point. We can see that things are turned upside down. So looking at it this way, people are different. people respond to different messages. And we sometimes forget that. Conservatives have a certain way of responding to words and phrases that activate the way they use their brains, and we do use them differently versus progressives. So message makers who are clever need to recognize, to emphasize the values that are predominant in each group of people, if we're just looking at it politically. But then there's so many others. And some people just look at the numbers and say, oh my gosh, we are already up from 350 and we weren't supposed to go past 400 and we're still going up. You give them the numbers and they start going at it right away. These are very rational, cognitive oriented people. And I'm not saying they're better than other people, but they're not. I'm just saying they're different. And then there are people who respond basically to emotions, to visuals. You show them suffering, and their empathy is basically what drives them. And then, and here's the biggest pack to get at, and that is to take advantage of the herd mentality. And I often hear people saying, oh, what one person does doesn't matter. But yes, it does. Just like our votes on election day, they're counted together. Everything we do tells other people, our friends, our family, the people who live around us, our coworkers, that climate is an issue that is important. So the actions that we take, we have social pressure. And when we see other people doing things, sometimes we don't even have to mention climate. They follow along. And then last of all, and most important of all, now we need year-round political organizing. When policymakers make the policies that enable business and others to thrive under very clear legislation that holds up renewable energy and wise use of energy, the rest will follow suit.
Well, I agree with you completely. I do think there will be kind of an upsurge in interest and commitment to this issue. I just don't know whether it's going to track fast enough. And I think for the climate deniers, the writing is on the wall, and devil will take the hindmost, and they will, and they'll be the one who suffer most, because they won't have sold their houses, they won't have moved, they won't have taken the precautions necessary. So, my opinion is, well, let them suffer then, because if they're so obtuse that they won't take on this message, then so be it. But
it's more complicated than that, though.
Yeah.
It's more complicated. The reasons for denial, and there are many. Sometimes it's for power and for money and prestige. But then there are other issues. There's the confirmation bias. If you said no in the past, it's hard to change your mind now and admit you were wrong. Then there's the emasculation issue, which is, some people aren't going to let some damn woman, Mother Nature, push them around and make them scared. So by God, they're not going to be afraid of the weather. Hello. And then there are others who can't really conceive of a world turned upside down because they're perhaps a religious, faith-based conviction. They've never seen anything like this before. And to quote Yeats, the center cannot hold, that's not something that they can accept or fathom. Then there are people who are not real leaders, and to belong to a group that they cherish and find security from requires that you adhere to the prevailing philosophy. So there's that. Then there are deeper issues, and that is that climate disruption evokes the sense of our own mortality, our own aging and death. And people don't want to hear about that. They don't want to face it. They don't want to talk about it. You don't talk about your funeral at a party. People don't want to talk about climate. And the other issues are that we've been told we're masters of the universe. As technology grows and makes us feel strong and powerful, the impression that we can dominate nature only grows. And I could go on about other aspects of this, but it is probably not worth our specific time here, except to say that it is education, yes, done properly, and influence of those around us, and electing politicians, putting people in office who understand we can shift the culture that way. And I'll just say one thing, which Al Gore actually borrows from an economist and I will borrow from both of them, and that is that things take longer to happen than we think they will, and then they happen faster than we ever could have imagined. And Al often uses, or former Vice President Al Gore often uses cell phone use to show that. And I like to hang on to that or embrace it when I feel that we're not doing enough or we're not going to be where we need to be, and recognize that there's always a place for us to hope, and that's one of them.
Yeah, I mean, we have to just move one by one the chips into the positive, climate activism mold, and I you're brilliant about this. I hope that the cumulative effect can kind of take on its own steam. And then the herd effect kicks in, and we all kind of get the message, and we get off our butts. I hope that's true. I mean, right now we're in a bit of a nosedive. We're cruising toward 2.5, which will be an unlivable biosphere for our children. So we have to pull out of this nosedive. We have to pull the airplane back up and try to correct this, and obviously reduce our fossil fuels. I hope we can pull it off. I mean, we are ingenious. We've suffered setbacks before. Maybe not one of this scale. Maybe not one of this caliber. This is basically the trial. This is the testing ground for the future viability of the human race, in my opinion. So I'm not sure we've ever confronted anything quite so existential. So I'm so grateful for your input, Dr. Van Sustren. We have a lot to learn from you. Appreciate all your passion for the issue and all the work you're doing. Any parting remarks you want to give before we adjourn?
Well, I'll find a parting remark, and that is that you are right. We are in a nosedive. I call it the graveyard spiral. But let's realize that in 1 hour time, we have all the energy from the sun that we need to power the world for a whole year. Wind, 40 times what we need. So we can do this, but we have to be smart, we have to be together, and we have to hurry.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Van Sustren. We look forward to chatting with you again. Thanks for taking the time, and let's all put our shoulder to the wheel and get this done.
Thank you very much.
Now let's hear about Esteban's visit to the Japanese pavilion and hear about some futuristic technology solutions that may be coming down the pike.
Good morning. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what's being showcased here?
Sure, we have two technologies. One is the superconducting motor. This is very small, lightweight, but very high output motor, could be used for mobility sectors. So this has a 2 megawatt output. Normally the size will be 10 times bigger than this, but we managed to make it small so that we can be used in mobility like aviation and so on in the future. So this could be used for the electric airplanes in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
And the other one is a power to chemical. This is the renewable, from using the renewable energy into some kind of chemical material. When there's CO2, there's not much of a use, but if you can convert CO2 to CO, carbon monoxide, you can use the raw material. So this CO electrolyzer is the product to convert carbon dioxide into carbon monoxide.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our company, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, we're basically technology providers, supplying or manufacturing those components. Not only those, these are carbon capture system and hydrogen-fired gas turbine, but we also produce transportation system like a train, metro, rockets, aircrafts. Yeah, so many things. Yeah. Power generation plants as well. And so today we are showing two systems or two products. One, again, the carbon capture system. This is our specialized process to capture the carbon dioxide from the flue gas, such as power plant, steel plant, oil and gas plant, okay, any flue gas source will capture the CO2, which is the capturing rate is good up to 95, 98, 99%. So then just like this, the 99. This is the purity of captured CO2. So you can use this captures carbon dioxide for example, food generation. This is actually food grade.
Yes.
Yeah. So like a soda, for example.
I see.
And then you can also utilize the carbon dioxide for enhanced oil recovery. There's so many things. Blue hydrogen, blue ammonia as well. And then this guy is our largest combustion turbine. And we call it this M701J machine, generating 450 to 550 megawatts as a single turbine. This one, we started the hydrogen-fired development many years ago, and now this one is good up to 30% of mixing of hydrogen. Although we have a smaller turbine, which is 30 megawatt size, then we can fire 100% hydrogen right now. And this one is ready in 2025 to fire hydrogen 100%. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
And we have considering the plastic waste issue is becoming a global big issue, and also of course GHG reduction is becoming very big issues. So those two issues, with this technology we can solve both. So plastic waste as a feedstock, and we can produce the hydrogen. Then you can utilize hydrogen as a vehicle energy or power generation, or maybe heat or electricity at your household. That is a solution for us.
So thank you for today, and we are GFE Engineering Corporation. So our business, we are constructing waste energy plant, geothermal plant, and also biomass power plant. And we have records that we contributed CO2 emission reductions year 2021. It's over 10 million tons CO2 per year. So in this chart, so blue one is Asia, Europe. We contributed 5.3 millions, and Japan 4.6 millions, other 0.7 million for recycling. So and also now we are constructing waste energy plant in Vietnam with financing by JCM, Joint Crediting Mechanism, created by Ministry of Environment, Japan. So what we want to do is, okay, we have experience constructing this kind of a plant in Asia, funded by JCM. So using this experience and also our technology, we want to also construct waste energy plant in Africa. So this is our main purpose to here, that we expect to meet authorities, countries, people who are interested about our technologies. And also, lastly, I would like to show you before, not only plant, but also we have experience constructing Suez Canal Bridge. This is the Egyptian-Japanese friendship bridge. So we had a joint venture, and half part we constructed.
Wow.
Yes. So I believe we could contribute more in Africa. This is our hope. Yeah, thank you very much.
I want to explain Hitachi's business briefly about. And Hitachi is providing whole social infrastructure, like energy systems, energy grid and others, and public transportation like railways and other digital platform systems to controlling the factories and the energy grids and others. So Hitachi is co-creating those infrastructure with customers and the public citizens. Since green transportation is very important, we are thinking how to transform whole infrastructure to greener one. And the key is, we think that co-creation with the government, societies and others. We are thinking about transforming the power grid, more greener one, we are proud of our high voltage direct current lines, which can deliver renewable energies more efficiently and cheaper. And also we are trying to change the public transportation, starting from the electrified railways. We are starting to develop the public bus and the other trucks using the EV batteries. We are doing a lot more. Digital platform is one thing. We are proud of our digital platforms, which can transform green products and the green consumptions. In conclusion, we are developing whole green infrastructure. Thank you very much.
This is an exhibition for the Panasonic latest initiative. This is a demonstration facility for RE100, which uses 100 renewable energy to cover the all electricity in the factory in Japan. So the uniqueness of Panasonic is to combine 3 batteries. First is solar power cell, and the second is a hydrogen fuel cell, and the third is a storage battery. Why we combine these 3 batteries? In Japan, we have a rainy season, so solar cell is not enough to cover all the electricity for the factory. So we combine the hydrogen fuel cell and the storage battery to stabilize the electricity for the factory. So throughout this combination, we can cover whole season.
I see.
Yeah, that's Panasonic uniqueness.
This is the first technology is about carbon minus concrete. It means the concrete absorbs the CO2. At first, instead of using the Portland cement, use a blast furnace slag. At this time, the CO2 will reduce 80% in comparison with the conventional concrete. After that, add CO2 from exhaust gas and react with CaO. After that, make a CaCO3. This one.
Yes.
So include CO3 and blast furnace slag. Totally, the concrete will reduce the CO2 from the in comparison with the conventional concrete. So this is our technology.
Hi, we are Spaceco from Japan, and our product is new material that cooling with gel energy, which means our product is just a film, but it makes 2 points. One is reflected sunlight, almost 95%, and then also another point is the material itself. It's trying to release the heat to the space, so it means make it cooler inside as well, and the material itself also not increase the temperature, so it should be without using any electric facilities as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Esteban. Jeff Dismukes' credentials are impressive, having worked at the USGS on coastal erosion and then at NOAA studying the migration of orcapods. He's the newest member of our team, having just arrived from the US. Let's hear a little bit from Jeff.
I spent most of my career working at the USGS in coastal erosion and shoreline change and mangrove studies, and then finished working with NOAA studying human impacts, particularly boating, on the orcapods in the Puget Sound. And like you said, I've just arrived here. This is my first COP, so I kind of just wanted to share my first impressions of what was going on and what it's like to be here.
Great. So yeah. I understand you have a couple slides to show us.
So the first thing I wanted to point out is that the place is really, in a lot of ways, overwhelming, because I would say it's about 15 square city blocks. So it's a huge complex. And the first thing you're greeted with are these maps. And I also have a graduate certificate in GIS. So I've done a lot of GIS work. And so I know how to read maps, but unfortunately these maps were very confusing and very difficult to follow with the floor plan. And so I ended up just doing a lot of wandering. The facility is several buildings, and they all have beautiful pictures on the outside. And that was one of the first things I noticed, besides the fact that they also, the pavilions have these really fancy displays and fancy video screens. And then there's air conditioning banks everywhere for as far as the eye can see, which was a little disheartening over here because actually the weather has been really pleasant with highs at most in the mid 70s, and you walk into the event space and it's generally freezing because they are full blast air conditioned. And one of the things I was trying to figure out, I have been to many academic conferences, and that's kind of what I had the impression that this was, but really there was very little of that. There was a very small academic posters display, and this was in front of where the big hall was, where the leaders of countries and policymakers were giving speeches. And so I wandered through all the pavilions that are hosted by the countries, and they're more like along the lines of a trade show where each country is highlighting industrial and technical innovations that they are implementing in their individual countries. So in a way, it's kind of a cross between a trade show, an academic conference, and a policy think tank, I guess would be the best way I could describe it. And then I started noticing that at all these country pavilions, they were hosting presentations with very little participation, which I found kind of odd as I wandered around and peeked into some of these presentations, that there really weren't a whole lot of people attending any of the pavilion presentations, which I was surprised about. And there also wasn't a whole lot of people attending the plenary sessions. And then I found that the massive crowds of people were actually at the food court, which was in the center of all this. And as I was overhearing conversations, I didn't hear a lot about climate. I heard a lot about, how bad the food was, or the bathrooms didn't have soap, or it was so much better, the food was so much better in Madrid, or, things like that. And so I really started to, unfortunately, my first day especially, come away with the impression that maybe everybody's right, that, this is a lot of posing and a lot of greenwashing. And then you see everybody leaving in their fancy big limousines, and there's planes flying over about every 5 minutes, big jumbo jets bringing people in. And I, really started questioning, what is the deal here? Is this really all worth it? Can't we all do this virtually somehow and save, or do we really need to just have this environment where people come and spend grant money to put on a good face in front of the crowds? But as on my second day, I stumbled across, tucked away in a little kiosk in a relatively not well seen space, this little kiosk from the UNFCCC Secretariat, and was announcing their project on archiving. And they are archiving speeches and presentations from countries, as well as scientific presentations, and essentially everything that goes on at these conferences, going all the way back to 1992. They had a real cool display of basically COP swag going back to 1992. And they're in the process of digitizing what they think will be over 1.7 million paper documents, along with videotapes going back to VHS and PowerPoint presentations already in digital form and all this. And so I started thinking, wow, this may be a place where I can answer those questions, and anybody could answer those questions because it's open to the public, of how the conference has progressed. Has it become more greenwashed? Is there bigger participation from oil lobbyists like we've read this year? And also, the original idea for the project was for the conference itself to have an evaluation standpoint and see if they can improve every year. That hasn't quite started yet. They're not using it for that. They anticipate that they will have everything archived back to 1992 by 2026. And you can currently reach the archives that they do have available, and that is at unfccc/archives.org. And this poster explains how to get there and how to access the data. So I thought, this is a pretty cool undertaking, and quite a huge undertaking, and it will give us the opportunity, I think, to really determine the history of COP, how the expectations have changed, and a lot of people would say have damped down over time, and where we might be headed with this in the future. Again, I think that this provides a great opportunity for people to gather all the information that's available at these conferences without having to fly here in a jumbo jet like I did and like everybody else is doing. And I didn't leave or come in a limousine, but a lot of people did. And here we are air conditioning the desert for all this discussion on climate change. And I'm not sure whether that's a great idea. And so I really just want to share with you and your audience this archival resource that allows basically all of us to gather the information that is available to the attendees at this conference.
Well, Jeff, I couldn't agree with you more that there's been an unsatisfying amount of progress at this year's COP. I think real questions emerge as to whether it is as to the efficacy of the conference. As you know, Greta Thunberg boycotted this year, and she's really calling it a greenwashing exercise.
Right.
In terms of the archives, I mean, that's useful. Metrics are always useful whenever you can establish, whatever facts and figures may have come. I think, that may be an interesting time capsule when we're all in the dystopian future, and we're all, there's like, 40 million of us left. Somebody will dig up these archives and say, look what happened before.
Look what they were talking about.
The roof fell in.
Yeah.
So that basically reinforces our impression that there's just not enough happening. We're not addressing this with enough urgency. Thanks for those thoughts, Jeff. Thanks for those thoughts and your input and your first impressions. We need to we need the pedal to the metal. We need to go full throttle. This is not a time for tiny measures, and this is not a time for greenwashing pencil pushers. We need to actually accomplish some things. We have no codified agreements in the COP so far. No international codified agreements. So I don't know what is holding things up. There's some talk that some countries are holding out because they want an agreement on loss and damage before they ratify other agreements. So that may be a logjam. I hope they're working away. I hope they are able to create something tomorrow, the last day of the COP. So thank you, Jeff.
So far, all we have is speeches, and we can get all these speeches online in the archives too. So if anybody's interested in actually any of the information that you can gather from these conferences, I suggest going to the archives and doing the search yourself. I'm not sure yet whether the attendance here is really worth it.
Yeah. Well, from your mouth to Buddha's ears, Jeff. I hope we pull a rabbit out of a hat. Thanks so much, Jeff, for that input. It's really interesting and useful. So enjoy the next couple of days of the conference. Best of luck to you, and we'll talk very soon.
Okay, thank you so much for having me.
We're really happy to have Jeff with us for these last few days of the conference. And now to Michael's photo recap of the day.
Let me offer my comments on what I experienced at COP27 today, November 17. I was welcomed by the usual protesters. Today the protest was about climate justice, gender justice, and delaying the justice. It was the usual size, about 20 to 30 protesters and maybe 100 people watching the protest. I took few detailed shots of the faces of these protesters today. I think this image shows it well. One of the interesting slogans I have heard today, it was from the lady with this green mask, this was supposed to be a loss and damage COP, but it becomes another lost and damaged COP. And I think it will resonate in many of the people, this specific slogan. Today COP felt like it is coming slowly to its end. On the bus there were people with their luggage. There were also many people walking with their packed luggage within the COP. People seem to be getting tired after being here for 2 weeks already. Some of them are here even for much longer when they were taking part in the preparations. I didn't really follow any people trying to get images of tired people, but as I walked around, I saw plenty of people taking naps and simply taking rest. I also noticed that some of the pavilions were already cleaned. This image was taken maybe at 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. Local time, so it's not the end of the day cleaning, it's simply the pavilion is being slowly closed and it is the cleanup for good. Many of the pavilions were kind of empty. This was a round discussion within one of the pavilions, and you can see there was only 6 or 7 people there. Some of the meeting rooms were also pretty empty. Not much going on there. Another example of a pretty empty pavilion. This is the United Arab Emirates pavilion, but this one is empty almost all the time because it's really huge. One of the pavilions that was very full was the Indonesia pavilion, because there was a presentation on kind of an unusual topic, or from an unusual perspective. This gentleman was delivering a presentation about the role of faith actors in climate change. So religion and climate justice was discussed today. There is also some leftovers and free swag that is being left behind, so people are running for it and collecting it so they can bring this back home. I visited also one of the posters sessions, and it was very empty. I spent there 15-20 minutes and only one person stopped by to have a look. What surprised me that some of the posters didn't really fit well on the board. Not sure why is that, whether the dimensions that were provided were not accurate or what happened there, but I would have expected that the posters would fit there somehow better. This is just an image, one of the posters which was already removed, so at least they left there the QR code. I took photos of all the posters, so they would be available as well. When it comes to the high-level politicians, I met this lady in the green clothes. Her name is Annalena Baerbock, and she's the German Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs. She went to the German pavilion where she delivered her message, and it was welcomed with a lot of cheering and clapping. Unfortunately, it was in German. I couldn't understand it all, but she talked about a lot of the loss and damage in the sense that many people were supporting her. So Germany is probably taking a lead on this. Another high-level politicians I met today is this gentleman. His name is Franz Timmermans, and he's the Vice President of the European Commission, and he's actually the main EU leader of the European Green Deal. So he's one of the leaders of the European climate law. I have seen him in previous COP, so he's really a big player on this topic for EU. Some of the pavilions have these huge LCDs displays, and often it's a pleasure to look at them, and sometimes it's a big pain. When I attended, or when I just stepped into this session in the Egyptian pavilion, I was kind of shocked that the image there played on the main screen was distorted like that. It was in a poor resolution, and the distortion was horrible. This was an event which was attended by 3 ministers of culture from different countries. So I would have guessed that they would at least fix it and have the display corrected. But no, it stayed there like this for the full hour of the presentation. Moving on, I walked to the US pavilion, and there was Dr. Laura Lorenzoni delivering her presentation on a hyperwall. Hyperwall is basically a system capable of displaying multiple high-definition data visualization simultaneously across an arrangement of screens. So she was explaining how different satellites are collecting data. Some of the equipment is located on the ISS, on the International Space Station. She talked about how if you get garbage data in, you also get garbage data out. So she was explaining how NASA is making sure that the data they collect are accurate and not garbage. She basically discussed how they do science, so the policymakers better understand the processes that are really happening. So it's all based on real science. It's not just this blah blah blah. And this presentation was not blah blah blah. It was really probably the best presentation I have seen at COP so far. She discussed the approach of not just open data and but also the open science. She offered a link to her presentation, so I took a detailed shot of that, went online to see that, and there was so much more information about hyperwalls there, something really worth looking at. And to close today, I realized that there is also the Ukrainian pavilion within COP. I did not know about it previously, so walked in. There was just a small session going on there, only a few people attending, and then I took the last photo of the day where this gentleman was explaining how they just opened some renewable energy facility within Kiev, and on the same day about 7 million of Ukrainians lost power because of the war going on there. So this would be the last image of the day, maybe showing some hard realities that are going on in Ukraine.
Thank you, Michael. Here at the conference, we all feel like nervous, expectant mothers waiting for the loss and damage agreement to drop. Last year at COP26, the fossil fuel agreement was to be announced with great fanfare on the last Friday of the conference. It was finally dragged over the finish line on Sunday, 2 days after the conference ended. The party's delegates had gone round the clock, wordsmithing themselves to death, for instance, squabbling over the difference between phase out and phase down of coal. The same thing may be happening here. I can only hope the delegate midwives will be successful and the baby will not be stillborn. The world is watching. Thank you and good night.